The Antonine Plague of 165 to 180 AD, also known as the Plague of Galen, was an ancient pandemic brought to the Roman Empire by troops who were returning from campaigns in the Near East. The plague may have claimed the life of a Roman emperor, Lucius Verus, who died in 169 and was the co-regent of Marcus Aurelius. Ancient sources agree that the plague appeared first during the Roman siege of the Mesopotamian city Seleucia. Ammianus Marcellinus reported that the plague spread to Gaul and to the legions along the Rhine. Eutropius stated that a large population died throughout the empire. The disease broke out again 9 years later in 189 AD and caused up to 2,000 deaths a day in Rome. The total death count has been estimated 5 to 10 million, and the disease killed as much as 1/3 of the population in some areas and devastated the Roman army. The Plague of Justinian was the beginning of the first plague pandemic, the first Old World pandemic of plague, the contagious disease caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis. The disease afflicted the entire Mediterranean basin, Europe, and the Near East, severely affecting the Sasanian Empire and the Roman Empire and especially its capital, Constantinople. The plague is named for the Roman emperor in Constantinople, Justinian, according to his court historian Procopius, contracted the disease and recovered in 542, at the height of the epidemic which killed about a fifth of the population in the imperial capital. The contagion arrived in Roman Egypt in 541, spread around the Mediterranean Sea until 544, and persisted in northern Europe and the Arabian Peninsula, until 549. Researchers confirmed earlier speculation that the cause of the plague of Justinian was Yersinia pestis, the same bacterium responsible for the Black Death. The latter was much shorter, but still killed an estimated 1/3 to 1/2 of Europeans. The Plague of Justinian is the first and the best-known outbreak of the first plague pandemic, which continued to recur until the middle of the 8th century. Some historians believe the first plague pandemic was one of the deadliest pandemics in history, resulting in the deaths of an estimated 15 to 100 million people during 2 centuries of recurrence, a death toll equivalent to 25 to 60% of Europe's population at the time of the first outbreak. The Black Death was the beginning of the Second Plague pandemic. The plague created religious, social, and economic upheavals, with profound effects on the course of European history. The pandemic originated either in Central Asia or East Asia, but its first definitive appearance was in Crimea in 1347. It was most likely carried by fleas living on the black rats that traveled on Genoese merchant ships, spreading throughout the Mediterranean and reaching Africa, Western Asia, and the rest of Europe from Constantinople, Sicily, and the Italy. Current evidence indicates that once it came, the plague was in large part spread by human fleas, which caused pneumonic plague, and the person-to-person contact via aerosols which pneumonic plague enables, thus explaining the very fast inland spread of the epidemic, which was faster than would be expected if the primary vector was rat fleas causing bubonic plague. The Black Death was the second disaster affecting Europe during the late Middle Ages. In total, the plague may have reduced the world population from an estimated 475 million to 350 to 375 million in the 14th century. There were further outbreaks throughout the late Middle Ages, and with other contributing factors it took until 1500 for the Europeans to regain the same level of population. The third cholera pandemic was the third major outbreak of cholera originating in India in the 19th century that reached far beyond its borders, which researchers believe may have started as early as 1837 and lasted until 1863. In Russia, more than 1 million people died of cholera. His pandemic was considered to have the highest fatalities of the 19th century epidemics. It had high fatalities among populations in Asia, Europe, Africa and North America. In 1854, which was considered the worst year, 23,000 people died in Great Britain. That year, the British physician John Snow, who was working in a poor area of London, identified contaminated water as the means of transmission of the disease. After the 1854 Broad Street cholera outbreak, he had mapped the cases of cholera in the Soho area in London, and noted a cluster of cases near a water pump in one neighborhood. To test his theory, he convinced officials to remove the pump handle, and the number of cholera cases in the area immediately declined. His breakthrough helped eventually bring the epidemic under control. Snow was a founding member of the Epidemiological Society of London, formed in response to a cholera outbreak in 1849, and he is considered one of the fathers of epidemiology. The Spanish flu, also known as the 1918 influenza pandemic, was an unusually deadly influenza pandemic caused by a virus. From February 1918 to April 1920, it infected 500 million people, about a third of the world's population at the time, in 4 successive waves. The first observations of illness and mortality were documented in the United States, Kansas, in March 1918, and then in France, Germany, and the United Kingdom. To maintain morale, World War I censors minimized these early reports. Newspapers were free to report the epidemic's effects in neutral Spain, such as the grave illness of King Alfonso XIII, and these stories created a false impression of Spain as especially hard hit. This gave rise to the name Spanish flu. Most influenza outbreaks disproportionately kill the very young and the very old, with a higher survival rate for those in between, but the Spanish flu pandemic resulted in a higher than expected mortality rate for young adults. Scientists offer several possible explanations for the high mortality rate, including a severe 6-year climate anomaly that affected the migration of disease vectors and increased the likelihood of the spread of the disease through bodies of water. Some analyses have shown the virus to be particularly deadly because it triggers a cytokine storm, which ravages the stronger immune system of young adults. The death toll is estimated to have been somewhere between 20 million and 50 million, although estimates range from 17 million to a possible high of 100 million, making it one of the deadliest pandemics in human history. The Asian flu pandemic was a global pandemic of influenza, a subtype virus that originated in Guizhou in southern China. Cases were soon reported in the neighboring province of Yunnan in late February or early March 1957. By the middle of March, the flu had spread all over China. The People's Republic of China was not a member of the World Health Organization at the time, and did not inform other countries about the outbreak. On the 17th of April 1957, The Times reported that an influenza epidemic has affected thousands of Hong Kong residents. By the end of the month, Singapore also experienced an outbreak of the new flu, which peaked in mid-May with 680 deaths, and Singapore was the first country to notify the World Health Organization about an extensive outbreak of the flu which appeared to have been introduced from Hong Kong. In Taiwan, 100,000 were affected by mid-May, and India suffered 1 million cases by June. In late June, the pandemic reached the United Kingdom. The first wave peaked in October and affected mainly children who recently returned to school after summer break. The second wave, in January and February 1958, was more present among elderly people and so was more fatal. The number of deaths caused by the 1957-1958 pandemic is estimated up to 4 million worldwide. First identified in Democratic Republic of the Congo in 1976, HIV/AIDS has truly proven itself as a global pandemic. HIV, or human immunodeficiency virus, is considered by some authors a global pandemic. As of 2020, approximately 75 million people are infected with HIV globally. There were about 700,000 deaths from AIDS in 2020. The 2015 Global Burden of Disease Study, in a report published in The Lancet, estimated that the global incidence of HIV infection peaked in 1997 at 3.3 million per year. Global incidence fell rapidly from 1997 to 2005, to about 2.6 million per year, but remained stable from 2005 to 2015. Sub-Saharan Africa is the region most affected. In 2020, an estimated 61% of new HIV infections occurred in this region. South Africa has the largest population of people with HIV of any country in the world. Approximately 1 million people in the United States had HIV, 14% did not realize that they were infected. In 2017, 93,385 people living with diagnosed HIV infection received HIV care in the UK. 42,739, Nearly 50% of those are gay or bisexual, a small segment of the overall population. AIDS was first recognized in 1981. In 1983, the HIV virus was discovered and identified as the cause of AIDS, and by 2020 AIDS caused nearly 42 million deaths.